Okay, we're interviewing Craig Jett, former president of TCDLA. Uh, Craig, what was the period of your presidency?
June 2007 to June 2008.
And where are you from?
I'm from Dallas.
How long have you been practicing law?
32 years, or give or take a few months.
And tell me a little bit about where you grew up, where you went to school, and how you got lucky enough to marry Sue.
That's not enough time to, but we moved to Texas in 1961 when I was 9 and have lived here ever since. As a judge in Fort Worth told me, asked me once, what's your excuse for living in Dallas? And I said, I was brought here by my parents against my will, and he liked that answer, and we proceeded on. But so I went to the University of Texas for undergraduate school, hook 'em horns, and I went to Southern Methodist University for law school, and then I entered private practice and haven't looked back. Oh, do they want me to talk about my wife?
Well, I want you to, yeah, I think that's probably
That's
fairly significant part of your history.
We met through mutual friends in Dallas, and I took probably 3 years too long to decide that we ought to get married, but we did. And she waited for me that long, and it seemed to have worked out because we've been together for almost 23 years.
And you've got 2 boys.
I have 2 boys who are 19 and 16.
I should say 2 young men now. Tell me a little bit about your oldest boy, Kellen.
He is a very talented artist. He's just finished his freshman year at Rhode Island School of Design, where he's now majoring in illustration, and he seems to have gotten the full load of his mother's genes. I don't seem to have diluted those at all, and he is an artist in every sense of the word. It's what he lives to do and wants to do, and what drives him and motivates him. So we're very proud of him, and I can't wait to see what he does next.
And Calder, he's 16, and where's he going to school?
He goes to Bishop Lynch High School in Dallas. And he's, for us not being Catholic, he's doing well with that whole thing. And he plays soccer, plays it well, and he is more of a kid who just likes to hang out and be 16 years old and do things that 16-year-old boys do.
Now,
and we're very proud of him as well.
Well, that's fair to say.
He does different things, but we're proud of both of them.
What part of Dallas do you live in?
East Dallas, near White Rock Lake.
And that's an area that has grown quite a bit recently, and you've rebuilt your house there, haven't you?
We did that about 5 years ago.
So you've spent some time in a rent house, a very small rent house, I understand, while you built a new house on your original lot.
We did. My wife was never happier.
And let's talk a little bit about your practice. Why did you choose criminal law?
Because I think it is exciting and important work. It drove me more to work on somebody's very personal problem than it did on other things. I did some civil work when I just started, and for some reason the criminal work is what drew my attention. I had to force myself to work on the civil cases when I had to, but was driven to work on the criminal cases because of the often the dire situations that your client was in.
You're board certified, right?
I am.
And when did you become board certified in criminal law?
1986.
So since that time, since you became certified, what percentage of your practice now is criminal law?
Right now it's about 95%. I'll dabble in a civil thing here and there that has criminal implications to it, where you need to watch the civil part in order to protect your client on the criminal case.
You're one of the few people I think we have in the organization who are not only licensed in the United States Supreme Court, but you've actually argued there, have you not?
I have.
Tell us about that.
It's a fascinating process. It's very stressful. It's when you get the call, it said this is Supreme Court, be granted cert, you go, oh, I got the call from the Supreme Court, and you go, oh shit, I got a call from the Supreme Court. And suddenly you're on another plane of law practice. The case is no longer just yours. It has national implications, and there are other people, other lawyers have interest in the issue, and they're interested in doing as well as you can with that particular issue. So there are lots of people that are willing to help and to work with you, and resources that are very valuable to do that. But it also puts lots of stress on the lawyer.
What were your issues in your case?
The issues in my case were, if you were asserting this was a federal case, if you're asserting duress in federal court, is the burden of proof on the defendant to prove duress by a preponderance of the evidence, or once the defendant raises the issue, is the burden on the government to disprove duress beyond a reasonable doubt. And we didn't get enough votes.
Which position were you advocating?
We were advocating that the government had, once you raise duress, the government had to disprove it beyond a reasonable doubt, which is what they have to do on a self-defense case throughout the country, with the exception of, I think, 1 or 2 states. But if you have self-defense, then you have to raise it. And then once you raise it, the government has to disprove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Somehow the Supreme Court found that was different than duress was different than self-defense. I don't see a significant, meaningful difference, but they did. So that's now the law in federal courts in this country. The majority rule in state courts, however, is that once a defense raises it, the government or the state has to disprove it. That's not the rule in Texas, but it is the rule in about 30 of the states.
Well, I guess that's part of expanding your scope when you argue in the Supreme Court, is that you now are familiar with how that issue is handled throughout the country.
You are. We briefed the issue and determined what all the circuits held, and then what the rules were in state court, and we looked at model penal code, of which Justice Scalia doesn't have a high opinion, but we looked at that, and that was in our favor. So you have to really broaden your scope, not only in terms of what the law is now, but in terms of historically what it has been, and historically where our law that comes from, and why, if it's changed, or why, if it hadn't changed, why it should be changed or remain the same.
What are some of the other memorable cases that you've either tried or appealed or been involved in over your career?
I think the case that probably has more to do with me being a criminal defense lawyer is a case where I represented an English arms dealer by the name of Dr. Ian Smalley in 1982. And he got a call one Friday afternoon from a civil lawyer. He said their client had just been arrested by the FBI. And he called me, and fortunately he was my neighbors. He knew how to get hold of me, and I had no idea what to do in federal court. So I called Richard Anderson, who is a former president of TCDLA, and we went to work on it. And we had a bond hearing, or detention hearing, one afternoon, and got our client released. Then we went home, and I looked at the news, and they had video of him crawling in and out of tanks. And we learned that this had been an ongoing government investigation for months that they had given the press access to. And so there was a Channel 8 reporter in Dallas who had video of him and had been given access to all this stuff. And the investigation was done by the Customs Service, but they really let the investigation be done by a couple of freelance operators who, what they were doing is that they were setting Dr. Smalley up, and he was going, or somebody was going to provide the money for, it was tanks to Iran and anti-tank missiles to Iraq, and they were going to get the money, turn him into customs, and keep the money. And we fortunately had a client who was well off, and he was, and we realized it was a complicated case, and so we hired Racehorse Haynes and Jack Zimmerman and Jan Fox of Houston. We went to trial for 2 weeks and got a not guilty.
Great.
And didn't even put on any evidence. So that was what you would call a watershed moment, when you realized this is what you should be doing. It inspired me to continue to do that. And so I think more than anything, that experience, those relationships, set me off on the path that I'm on now.
Weren't you also involved in a case involving the Banditos?
I was. That was probably as much fun as the other one. There were about 20 members of the Bandito Motorcycle Club who were charged with trying to use explosive devices, conspiring to use explosive devices to retaliate against members of another motorcycle club who had apparently shot and killed one of their members. And so the problem, the feds got involved because the Banditos are alleged to be involved in other illegal things. My client I was appointed, he was incarcerated on an arson case. And most of them were not incarcerated. But there were about, 16 of us that went to trial. The case was tried for 2.5 weeks. About half of us got instructed out. Were given judgment of acquittals when the government rested.
You said us. Was your client one of those?
My client was one of those. But the great thing about that, other than there were 3 or 4 convicted. There was at least one who was convicted and then turned around on appeal. And then there was about the 8 or 9 who were acquitted by the judge because the evidence was insufficient. They weren't able to show that the clients had particular knowledge of the manner and means of the conspiracy. In other words, they were able to show that they had some knowledge of some scheme to retaliate, but they didn't have knowledge of the particular way in which it was done, which was necessary. So they were acquitted. But the great thing about it was being able to work with all of the wonderful lawyers that were part of that team.
There were quite a few former presidents on that team, didn't
Tim
we?
Evans, Mark Daniel, Ron Goranson, Richard Anderson, Ken Schaefer. At that time, I didn't think I would be one of those. So we got to work with really good lawyers and got to learn how to work together, which is perhaps the most important lesson, is how defense lawyers need to work together and for the benefit of everybody. And it showed the benefit of that teamwork, and we all benefited from that.
Any other major cases or cases that were maybe not major to the press but significant to you in forming your character as a defense lawyer?
I don't know about forming my character, but I think I was involved in another conspiracy case of some young kids who were skinheads who thought it was cool to run black people out of Lee Park in Dallas, that's Robert E. Lee Park, and to vandalize a Jewish temple on the anniversary of Kristallnacht. They were arrested and they were prosecuted by the Department of Justice from Washington, and it was another great instance of teamwork. We had clients who were not very sympathetic. Oh, they were young and stupid, most of them, but they, done reprehensible things. And we had a team of lawyers. It included some of us who were, what we did was criminal defense lawyers. There was a civil trial lawyer who was appointed, who was on our team. We had a black lawyer and a Jewish lawyer. And when we started our case, the first face that the jury saw during opening statements was the black lawyer, saying, his name is Leon Carter. He's a good lawyer. He does civil work now, but he told the jury, he says, they don't believe in civil rights, but I do. And I believe in their civil rights. And I believe that they're entitled to have a fair trial. And so we went off from there. And they were convicted. We almost made some law and appeal. We were not allowed during voir dire to find out if somebody was Jewish. And Judge Sanders wouldn't let us do that, and we preserved that. When we went up on the panel, we had a visiting judge, not a visiting judge, a retired judge. And so we lost at the panel 3-0, and we asked for a rehearing en banc. And so we got one, and we got 14 judges because we had the retired judge who'd been on the panel. And Fifth Circuit split 7-7, so we lost 7-7. And the odd thing is that we got to argue before the en banc Fifth Circuit, which was very interesting because there were 14 judges, and you couldn't see them all at one time. You had to turn your head to be able to see them all, and they were arguing back and forth. And we had unlikely judges. We had Edith Jones and Judge Higginbotham on our side, and then others on the other side, and there was no rhyme or reason to who was on what side. And so all this effort had the opportunity to make some great law, and we tied, and so we lost.
And I gather the petition for cert was denied.
The petition for cert was denied, and but it was one of those cases that had a high profile to it, which provides more interest in some ways. It makes it more difficult to handle because you've got to think about the publicity there, and it's a significant issue nationally as well. So that was a wonderful experience, and I can't. The trial was a wonderful experience. The verdict wasn't. The sentence wasn't. But it was, as a lawyer, it was a great experience.
Well, let's talk about DLA a minute. How long have you been a member?
I've been a member since October of 1978.
And you've served all sorts of different positions within TCDLA. Let's start at the back end and talk about your presidency. What were the issues during your year, and what was that experience like?
The presidency it's a lot of work. It's very rewarding. There can be a lot of conflict within that because defense lawyers are very opinionated people and are generally not shy about expressing their opinions. So it's sort of like herding cats, actually. But you get to do some great things. You get to associate with all the members and all the board members and all the officers and all the past presidents. So that experience with all of the ability to meet and talk and be with all those people is a great experience. In our presidency, in my presidency, we had to deal with the grant, make sure that we were doing that right, and we were concerned about scrutiny from the Court of Criminal Appeals.
Briefly, for the sake of somebody that may be watching this after the grant goes away or goes somewhere else, What is the grant?
The grant is it's a grant of a large amount of money from the Court of Criminal Appeals that is funded by court costs that is used to train lawyers. And TCDLA for the last several years has been entrusted with a large amount of money with the particular purpose to go train lawyers, provide low-cost training to lawyers to teach them all the things they need to know about how to defend their clients. And we had been under scrutiny from them. It was a relatively new thing for us to start with, so we were still learning how to manage it, learning the rules, learning to deal with the change of the rules, and we were overseen by the Court of Criminal Appeals, and so we were having to deal with scrutiny from them, just learning what we're supposed to do. So that was a significant issue. We had issues about this criminal law specialization and efforts to change that, and substantial debates as to whether we should have criminal appellate law specialization or whether it should be otherwise divided. And so we had debates about that are still ongoing now, 3 years later. So that was significant. It's always there are decisions to be made about what does the organization need, what the lawyers need in terms of continuing legal education, because that's probably the most important thing that we provide. We provide information, we provide teaching about skills, teaching about the law to lawyers, to help them improve their ability to represent their client. That's our charge to the public, or from the public, is to try to have the best criminal defense lawyers that we can so that the criminal justice system works as well as it can. And if it doesn't have good lawyers on both sides doing their job the way they're supposed to do it, and good judges, then the system doesn't work very well.
Did you have a legislative session during your year?
Just on the tail end of one, not the full year. I sort of dodged that bullet. We did have one other issue. This was the issue when the presiding judge at the Court of Criminal Appeals closed the courthouse at the clerk's office at 5 o'clock when lawyers representing a death row inmate were trying to file a stay of execution, and the clerk's doors were closed at 5 o'clock, and the court knew they were on their way, and they closed the doors. The paperwork wasn't filed. The man died that evening. And
if memory serves, the presiding judge was not the judge designated by the court to be the go-to person for issues that evening. Is that correct?
No, that's correct. There were judges in the court that evening expecting to receive paperwork from the Texas Defender Service, who was representing the man on death row.
And this also sprang, if I recall correctly, from the fact that the Supreme Court made a decision earlier that morning that was the justification for the stay. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's what made the timing so difficult, is that they had granted certiorari on an issue to decide whether or not the drug cocktail, the narcotic cocktail, was cruel and unusual punishment. And it's the same one that Texas used. And so suddenly that affected all of the existing death sentences in Texas. And so it was a very important case. And there was that one gentleman who was sentenced to die that evening was going to be given the lethal injection. And his lawyers were not given adequate opportunity to file the necessary paperwork, and which we thought was a travesty. So we joined, after doing some independent research on what happened, we joined other lawyers and other organizations to file a judicial conduct complaint with the Texas Judicial Commission, or the Judicial Conduct Commission, and they took it from there.
And as a matter of fact, as we're speaking today, that is still pending.
That is still pending. There's been a trial, And there's been evidence and there have been some findings, but there's been no final decision.
In the years as you look forward, what directions do you think TCDLA needs to proceed? Where do we need to go?
We need to keep up with the times, and that means technology. We have to equip ourselves, equip our members with the technology where we can do the best job that we can for them. And it's hard for an individual to do that, so that's an area that TCDLA can help on. We need to continue to do the training that we've done and expand that if we can. We're probably, I don't know if we can do any more than we're doing now, but make use of the resources we have. I think we also need to foster an ethical integrity within the entire criminal justice system. We have had terrible problems with that in Texas with prosecutors hiding evidence. But we also have problems with the defense lawyers who don't do their jobs. And we have problems with judges who don't do their jobs. And the system won't work unless people do their jobs with integrity. And that has been a failing in Texas. I think we need to have a collegial attitude among defense lawyers and among defense lawyers, prosecutors, and judges when we're not in the courtroom. We need to do our jobs in the courtroom, but outside that we need to be collegial because all of us are important. It won't work with just one of us. And we need to somehow get away from the lack of collegiality that we have and understand that we're all human beings and we're all trying to do a job and we all have an interest in what the other is doing.
Well, as a matter of fact, you've had some direct experience with that this year because you're also serving on the state bar, are you not?
Yeah, I'm right now, for another week, I am the chair of the criminal justice section of the state bar, which is made up of defense lawyers, prosecutors, and judges. So we have to work to find common ground and to find out what we can do for the criminal justice system as a whole and the practicing lawyers and the citizens of the state. And we've had some success at doing that, about which I'm pleased to see. We keep our differences in the background and try to find common ground about the things that we have in common and that we think are good for the system. And I'm pleased to have been able to do that. It's a good experience to be able to work hand in hand with judges and prosecutors and try to accomplish something positive.
Have any interest in being state bar president?
No. I don't. I think I've been president of enough organizations at this point, and I think I'd rather have somebody else do that.
Thank you a lot, Craig.
Thank you.
It's good to visit with you.
Thank you.